Welcome here. This is going to be the group on, well, the fancy name for it's the biology of addiction, but really what I call it is your brain on heroin. And heroin, OxyContin, doesn't matter. They all work the same way in terms of how they affect your biochemistry. Opiates have probably been around 3, 4, 5,000 years. They were the first cultivated plant that humans grew on purpose. The problem is that the opiates that we're using now, that are like pharmaceutical drugs like OxyContin, Dilaudid, they're very much more potent than anything that anybody ever grew 3,000 years ago, and so they cause a lot more problems for people. The other thing that happened is, and right before the Civil War, they invented the hypodermic needle, and once that happened, people could use this drug in another whole way that caused another whole set of problems.
Is there a difference between an opiate and an opioid?
There's 3 different kinds. There's a total opiate, which is like opium or morphine. Then there's semi-synthetics, which are like heroin and OxyContin. And then there are totally synthetic narcotics like fentanyl and methadone is a totally synthetic narcotic.
Okay.
So and those are all opioids. Opioid is like the name for all opiates. Opiates in your brain. Every person who's born in the world has a molecule in their brain that's exactly the same as morphine. And it goes to very specific sites in your brain that are called opioid receptor sites. And it stimulates those sites in your brain. And it basically does 3 things for you. First thing it does for you is it helps lift your mood so that you feel better. If you're under a lot of stress or something didn't go right for you, your brain will read that automatically. Your brain's a really great organ. It's very plastic. It really adapts to anything that happens for you. And it pumps out these substances that are like morphine. It stimulates this part of your brain. It helps lift your mood so you can deal more effectively with whatever it is that's happening to you. That's the first thing that it does for you. The second thing that it does for you is that it helps you feel motivated. It stimulates the parts of your brain that help you want to get up, go do your job, take care of your kids, work on your car, mow your lawn, all that kind of stuff, right? Motivates you. The stereotype for people who don't know about opiate addiction, right, is that, you know, somebody's using opiates, they're a junkie, whatever negative words they want to use about you. You shoot up, and then what? You're like laid back, tongue's hanging out, you're drooling, you're all. That is not people. That's not your experience, is it? When you use, what happens? Ready to go. So that's the second part of your brain that is really affected by opiates. Is this motivational part, and the third part is whatever natural pain relief you get. Right? When you get an injury that's not important, and your brain will know that. It pumps out some of this neurochemical, and it helps mask the pain that you're having. And it is a really important part of how your brain functions because it helps you ignore things that aren't important and lets you kind of carry on with your day. You know, when we were running through the jungle when tigers were chasing us or whatever, and you stubbed your toe, you couldn't stop and like feel every bit of pain that your toe had, the tiger would catch you, right? So this is all part of a natural system that's developed over millions of years that you need in order to be normal, in order to function normally. I have it. Everybody has it, and you need it. What happens when you use opiates, large amounts of opiates in particular, that you introduce from the outside is they go to these same receptor sites in your brain this natural opiate goes to, right? And it stimulates them. Only the difference is that typically whatever drug you're using is way more potent than anything that your brain's producing. OxyContin, morphine, heroin, Dilaudid, those drugs are way more stimulating to those parts of your brain than these natural neurochemicals are. And the other thing that happens is that the cells in your brain that produce the natural chemical stop producing it because it sees that you've got plenty of this molecule in your brain that doesn't need to be making it anymore. And within a very short time, 6 months or a year or so, those cells that produce this chemical in your brain, they either shrink up and die, or they just stop producing the drug anymore, the natural chemical for you anymore. And when you try to stop using opiates, this natural chemical system doesn't turn on like a light switch. It's really been damaged by right. And what happens is you go through the gross withdrawal, right? The jonesing that everybody talks about, which for most people lasts 5 days or a week or something like that, where you feel really sick, vomiting, diarrhea, and all that. But then what happens after that is a long period of time that we call post-acute withdrawal syndrome. That's just a fancy word for feeling like shit for weeks, days, weeks, months, years on end. And usually how people feel are depressed, anxious, no motivation, every bump and bruise hurts. Yeah. Everything that brain chemical system does for you isn't working. And so you're going from a person who's used to having tons of this stuff on board, not feeling any pain, not having any down days. You normalize it yourself, right, to this amount of opiate that you're using. Going from that to having not even what people naturally have on board. And that's why 90% of the people who don't use replacement therapy relapse, because they can't stand how they feel over the long period of time. Most of the treatment programs in the United States are what they call abstinence-based treatment programs, right? And the idea of abstinence-based treatment programs is that you go into that program, you go through a detox from all the substances that you're using, and the expectation is that you're never going to use another drug of abuse from that point forward forever, right? And if you don't do that, if you relapse back to the use, what happens to you usually in those programs?
You never make it back.
Right, they kick you out, or they tell you to start back at ground zero, or...
You get let down.
Right, right. And most of these programs also do not utilize replacement therapy as part of their treatment. They don't use methadone or buprenorphine. And so what happens is that people who are opiate dependent, who go into those programs, are very unlikely to be able to be successful in them. If you take people who have significant opiate problems and you put them in a program that doesn't use replacement therapy after they've detoxed, 90% of those folks that are opiate dependent will relapse back to the use of opiates within a year after they finish that program. So what happens is opiate dependent people don't do well in all those programs, and they can come away from that experience very often feeling a lot of different things, but often feeling like that you're losers, or somehow you weren't really motivated, or somehow you really didn't want to get better, and you get a lot of negative messages about yourself from that. And it's very discouraging in terms of getting involved in treatment or thinking that you might ever have an opportunity to get better, right? So what we do here is run a program that is not abstinence-based. If abstinence, meaning not using drugs or alcohol ever again, is your goal, we'll support you in that and we'll work with you around that. But if you're a person who that's not the direction that you want to go in, we will continue to work with you in this program. If you're using, you can come, and if you only have the intention of reducing your use, we will continue to work with you. And that's really what's called a harm reduction approach to working with opiate addiction. 80% of the people who come to this program shoot dope, right? They're IV users. High-risk behavior, right? OD really easy, get diseases really easy. So if we can help you stop doing that, we can improve your health greatly. And the reason I'm telling you this is that there's a lot of misunderstanding about this, both from patients who come here and also by people in the community who live out here around us and other treatment providers. What you're apt to hear from people out in the world out there is, oh, they're crazy there, they don't know what they're doing, you're never going to get better, you're never going to... And that's really because they don't understand what it is we're trying to do. They're so used to seeing abstinence-based, 12-step, self-help group-based programs as the only way to get better. But only about 20% of the people who have addiction ever get better that way. The other 80% need something different, and that's really what we're trying to do.